Welcome to School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist, and a mental health coach. And I know firsthand that rock bottom can be the greatest teacher and a springboard for a beautiful life. And it's these careers, passions, and life experiences all combined that have given birth to this podcast. Those working in the creative industries are 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem, and those working in performing arts and entertainment are 15 times more likely to suffer with anxiety and twice as likely to suffer with depression. And as you know, I invite fellow creatives and inspiring people that have lived through a rock bottom, survived, and thrived. This is a podcast of hope and how to get out of the darkness. And I'm really excited today because I have got the marvelous Matt Follows, I would say in the building, but this is my first ever remote record. And I'm very jealous because he is in Mallorca. How are you, Matt?
I'm very well, mate. Thank you very much. Very well indeed. Nice and hot.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. Before we dive in, I'm going to give Matt a quick intro, if that's all right, and then we're going to just crack straight on. So, Matt Follows. For over 28 years, Matt has worked with, led, and now coaches some of the most well-known and highly respected leaders in the world, including chief creative officers, CEOs, boards of directors, 7-figure founders, corporate presidents, and Hollywood A-listers. Wow. Prior to pressure-proofing brains and eliminating the subconscious bullshit holding people back, he was an executive creative director in London and Sydney, very jealous about that, where he helped build and run creative departments for some of the biggest and most influential brands on the planet, including Nike, Virgin, Apple, and Google. Today, as well as being a peak performance psychologist and executive coach for some of the sharpest, smartest, most prolific creative brains in the business, he trains leaders and teams at Fox, National Geographic, Toyota, Lexus, Universal, Maxis, and Westfield, where he upskills everyone from the sharpest CEO to the greenest grad. Before coaching full-time in 2012, Matt spent 4 years as a complex trauma therapist for lawyers, doctors, and super yacht owners, and has got the letters after his name and scars on his back to deal with anything and bring to the table, no matter how deeply troubling or deeply ingrained. In addition to gaining a raft of traditional coaching qualifications, Matt graduated from King's College London with a first in clinical psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, and is a master practitioner of NLP, as well as CBT therapist, an EMDR practitioner, an advanced EFT coach, and a master trainer in advanced conversion hypnosis. Wow. After more than 30,000 hours of one-on-ones and group coaching sessions, he's created a completely unique approach to coaching and therapy that he calls the Magic Bullet Method. Wow, it's very impressive, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm going to start with maybe the hardest question of all, Matt. And I've invited you on because obviously you've had a rock bottom and very much turned it around. But please could you share with the listeners and the viewers what that rock bottom was, and try and use all your amazing storytelling skills to really take us there and what was going on for you. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess starting at the rock bottom was probably waking up in Middlesex Hospital, finding out I'd had a massive anaphylactic shock, and I was a few seconds away from a couple of massive heart attacks as well at the age of probably, I think it was about 27 years old. So I'd managed to completely obliterate my nervous system and my immune system at a very, very early age. And I think that was probably the lowest point, was being in that hospital bed with tubes sticking out my veins, not looking in a very good way, blown up to twice my size, and feeling like shit, basically. It's probably the lowest point that I got to.
Looking at the notes and talking to you beforehand, I think when we think of an anaphylactic shock, we often think of an allergic reaction. That's the most common way. But I believe yours was actually caused, and I actually only just learnt this, by acute stress. I think also maybe your lifestyle choices weren't the healthiest, and so therefore your immune system shut down. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's really rare, but can happen under extreme stress, which it sounds like you were going through.
Yeah, so what I had done, I had started working. I used to work in advertising before I did what I did. I mean, as you said in the introduction, so I was working in advertising, and I was a young guy working in advertising. And as you used to do back in the 90s when I started, we worked hard and we played hard. So we would work all hours that God could send. We'd be working from very early in the morning until very early in the morning. We wouldn't take weekends off. We wouldn't take bank holidays off. We would cancel holiday. In fact, I don't even remember having holidays for a lot of years, because you really wanted to do your best within that business, within that industry. You were always wanting to win awards. So what you don't realize when you're doing that, especially in the way I was doing it, and kind of a lot of people who I grew up with at that time were doing it, we kind of like we're mainlining a lot of adrenaline and cortisol all of the time. And the way we cope with the stress is by drinking copious amounts of alcohol, essentially. So kind of like be working like really, really hard, working really, really powerfully through the days. Then we would go and get alcohol to kind of pretend to recover. Then we'd be back in for the second half of our day. Then we would do more. So over time, that obviously compounded and got worse and worse. And the more you push that stress off, the more your body's still overloading you with adrenaline and the cortisol, but you're not feeling it. And what tends to happen is that the worse that you feel, the less you actually feel. So you actually feel really, really good. You feel like you're performing at a very high level. You kid yourself into thinking you're performing at a high level. Everybody else is telling you that you're being a bit strange and you're acting out. But as far as you're concerned, within your own brain, within your own neurology, you feel good about it. You feel like, well, I'm hitting my deadlines. We're winning the awards. We're doing the work. The work's getting famous. The agency's getting famous. There's not a problem here. But obviously, as you do that over time, and I'd done that for, I guess, before the hospital, I'd probably done it for about a decade, 10 years straight through. And as I say, I didn't have holidays. I literally did not take holidays. We very rarely took a weekend off. And over time, that builds up, it accumulates. And what happens is your immune system just gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And what happened with me is I ended up in the Diet Coke shoot. And I ate something in one from the catering truck that I didn't realize I was allergic to, had a massive reaction to it, which obviously I didn't think I was going to have a massive reaction to it. So that caught us out of the blue, blew up, as you kind of do when you have an anaphylactic shock. Didn't know what was happening. Luckily, one of the producers on this shoot, she was amazing, and she kind of like got me into the car, sped me. We were shooting across the road from Middlesex Hospital. She got me in. They kind of like, I was desperately trying to breathe in the car. I had a cold at the time as well, a really bad cold or flu or something. And so my nose was bunged anyway. So my throat was blocking up. My nose was blocked. And then I was trying to wipe my nose. But then I don't know if you've ever done it when you got a cold, but if you've had a bad cold, the tissue starts breaking up. So I breathed in, so I was trying to breathe, and I breathed in tissue into my mouth and up my nose as well. So I was having anaphylactic shock, a blocked up nose, and tissue was going in there, speeding across the road. It was shit. So, but we got into the ICU, and I remember just being into the emergency room. It was a very busy emergency room, and I'm used to being in emergency rooms and you get told to wait hours. I just remember like a bunch of faces turning around, looking at me all at once, and went, "Shit, get him on the crash thing, whatever." Got me on there, sped me through the hospital, got me into the thing. I was still conscious, but pretty all over the place. I just remember them pushing things into my veins and stuff, and just loads of chat going on and stuff. And they tried to knock me out as well. They were trying to give me a load of whatever it is, sedative, to knock me out. I wasn't going to be knocked out because I thought I was dying. So I was kind of like, I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to sleep. And actually, what happened was that when I came back to a few hours later, and my body had kind of stabilized a little bit, they actually said to me, after they said like you were very close to having a massive cardiac arrest, they actually said, we've never actually known someone who's been able to fight that much sedation before as well. So well done, because no one's ever been able to fight that so much. But that was how fearful I was that this was it. This was the kind of end of it. So that was kind of a bit of a wake up call to realize quite how badly you can smash your immune system if you don't look after it, if you don't take care of it. And I hadn't taken care of it for about a decade. So
I mean, also, like you say, you were fearful that you were going to die, but also it sounds like a massive buildup of adrenaline was probably in your bloodstream as well, that kind of supercharged whatever fear you were feeling. I appreciate you're not, a doctor, and so I don't expect you to know all the answers to this. But do you think, had you not been stressed and you had have been, you know, fully functioning and at your optimal health, that you would have had such a severe reaction to whatever it was that you ate? I only asked that because in the research I found out as well that stress can actually make you more allergic to things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you've got two types of stress. So you've got the good stress, which is eustress, EU stress, as it's spelled, and then you've got the other side, which is distress. So you need a certain amount of stress in your brain to kind of get the prefrontal cortex online, because it brings the blood to that frontal part of the brain. But if you go too much, then it starts tripping into your amygdala, and it starts tripping the fear centers out, and then you start getting all of that cortisol. Now, from a creative perspective, and from creative people who have to use their creative brains to kind of earn a living, it gets even worse, because we know that cortisol actually causes cells within your brain to commit suicide. There are a thing called cortisol receptors in every cell and every nerve within your brain, mind, and body. And so cortisol, when you release it, is a second stress hormone that releases when you get a stressed out situation. Adrenaline first and cortisol. A cortisol attaches it to everything, every single cell and nerve. And what it does, it actually starts overstimulating the brain cells in the place called the hippocampus in the brain, which is responsible for laying down and recalling long-term memory. So the long-term effects of chronic stress is that you start being more forgetful. You start forgetting where you've left things. Looking back now, I can see all the signs. I started forgetting briefs I was working on. I started forgetting people's names. I started forgetting meetings I should be turning up for. Now, because I had kind of balanced out the stress with alcohol, I just blamed that kind of stuff. Oh, I must be hungover or something, not realizing it was actually, yes, I was probably hungover, but that was even being more compounded by the stress as well. So you have to be really careful with it, because it's kind of, it just destroys your immune system. And especially now, when we've got a lot of nasty things knocking about, you need a strong, healthy immune system. So you need to balance it. You want to have a good amount of stress, but when it starts getting out of control and you start feeling out of control, don't try and numb that down with pacifiers, essentially, because the pacifiers are just a band-aid. It's like you chop your leg off, you've got a septic wound. It's like putting a band-aid on it, but not cleaning out the wound. It's gonna get infected. And that's what happened to me. So looking back, I can see all the signs now. I was sleeping awfully. I was eating crap food. There was nothing I was doing to help myself, looking back on it, at all. It was all about the work.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. Some really, really good insights there as well. And I think, even on a sort of basic biological level, stress it causes inflammation, which again, in the short term, if you've got an injury, is very, very useful. But we know that inflammation in the body for prolonged periods, for cancer, for example, is huge, and loads of other illnesses as well. It was really interesting when you talked about the role of alcohol in there as a kind of way of managing stress. And I think it's an important conversation to have, because I think when there is any kind of like alcohol misuse with mental health, there's a lot of talk about not functioning, about people sort of passing out and withdrawing from life completely. Um, but alcohol and drugs, they also play the role for a lot of people about getting stuff done. I know when I work with people that are recovering from cocaine use, for example, you know they're not using cocaine, some of them, to escape their life in any way. They're actually using it so they can actually get work done. And I know you weren't talking about cocaine, but you were talking about alcohol as a way of coping. It sounds to me that you were very high functioning, even though you were of clearly, you hit a brick wall with it. um I appreciate these are very personal questions. Do you think you were suffering from alcoholism, and do you think you were suffering from workaholism?
100% workaholism, 100%. Whether I was an alcoholism is to be debated. It was certainly very, very unhealthy levels. I mean, the weird thing is that at that time within that industry, so we're talking the 90s in advertising, it's kind of the culture was work really hard and get drunk really hard. And it was kind of, if you, strange, it's like you look at it now and it's very, very different for so many good reasons. But back then, if you didn't drink, you weren't a part of the gang, you weren't a part of the group, you were kind of seen as a bit of an outcast. It was kind of strange. So you would do that. I would drink one to shut my brain off because it wasn't shutting off, because I was so wired from all of the adrenaline. The only way I could shut my brain off at the end of the day was to get drunk. It's the only way I could actually stop thinking and stop churning ideas over. Now, where it went bad was that it's, at first, the alcohol really helped me to come up with ideas because it loosens you up, it relaxes you. And so what we used to do back in those days, we'd convince ourselves, we'd have this a code word we'd say in the agency, which is like, if you were working, it gets to about 11:30 in the morning and someone would come up to your desk and say, hey, do you fancy popping out for a sandwich? You go, yeah, I'll go and get my coat, let's go and have a sandwich. We knew that meant 2 to 3 pints of Stella. But what would happen, and here's the amazing thing, is that we would genuinely believe that that was high productive space that we were going to. We'd go to a place called the King's Arms. We'd sit down with some packets of Frazzles and a couple of beers with our work, and we would do the work. But that was the norm. So it's really hard to know if you were abnormal or normal. Now you can kind of say that's an abnormal amount of stuff to drinking, or that's not a healthy amount. Back then, I would say I was probably even drinking less than a lot of people were doing. I was doing a lot less than a lot of people were doing. But as a great quote by an Indian philosopher, which is, it is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that's what happened with myself and probably a lot of people, a lot of my friends and colleagues within that as well. We measured ourselves by that standard. So whether we were or not, I don't know. Were we using it healthily? 100% not. I mean, no, not in any which way.
So it probably fell under more of the category of kind of alcohol misuse at the time, rather than sort of an alcohol use disorder, it sounds. I mean, again, a bit of a personal question. You're able to drink now healthily.
100, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and now I can see the difference. So now I don't even, now, I mean, maybe it's just I'm getting old, but now I don't like that feeling of being out of control. Back then, I loved that feeling of being out of control. And I guess in some ways, if I think about it, is because I was so in control at work, because you had to be in control at work. Otherwise, if you weren't in control of the brief, if you weren't in control of the ideas, you wouldn't be in a job for a great deal of amount of time, because there's other people who want your job. Especially, again, back in those days, it was one of the sexiest industries to be in with advertising. So we were working on all the things like Silk Cut, British Airways, Nike, and all of this kind of stuff. These were sexy brands to be working on. So everybody wanted to work on them. So you're high functioning in that, you've got to have some outlet. And our outlet and my outlet was get obliterated, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and that really takes me back to that time when you say, it was sexy to work on a Silk Cut commercial. I remember that very, very well, and I'm really pleased that I've noticed a cultural shift. I'm sure it doesn't exist everywhere, but even back at university, I can remember all the lecturers in the pub at lunchtime on the pints, and then us all going back to uni. And I don't know if that goes on anymore because I'm not at university, but it seems very outdated now, and I wouldn't imagine that happens. They probably end up on Twitter or something, or on TikTok. My professor's drunk or something, and there'd be a. How do you keep the pressure cooker low now for yourself? Obviously, you've got this amazing, life experience, which you've clearly learned from. I would imagine that you'd be very much on top of your own mental health pressure cooker, if I can use that analogy. How do you steer away from workaholism now, and how do you keep your stress levels to a healthy level now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things when I talk a lot about sustainable high performance in the work that I do, basically sustainable high performance is working with your biology, not fighting your biology. And so back in those days, I would be actively fighting my biology in any which way, shape and form I could, and enjoying it. I was enjoying the fact that I was at war with my own nervous system. I was enjoying the fact that I was at war with my own immune system until eventually it decided to win the war on me. So now I don't fight my biology. So there's certain fundamentals that we want to keep in place and that I keep in place now. And these are eat, move, sleep, breathe, focus, and celebrate. And I would advise anybody to kind of keep these fundamentals in mind. If you want to keep yourself in check mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all of that kind of stuff, is go hard on the fundamentals: eat, move, sleep, breathe, focus, and celebrate. So I can go into them if that's going to be useful. I can just kind of unpack them a little bit. This is what I do. Yeah. So basically with eat is that you want to make sure, and what I don't do now. So when I was back in those days, I would eat tons of processed food and I would drink loads of alcohol and I'd have loads of sugar, loads of sugary drinks, loads of sugary stuff. These are all kind of stimulants that are kind of trying to stimulate me because I'm caning myself with adrenaline and cortisol, which a lot of people do. But now, and then I was also having the stimulants like the sugar, the caffeine, the alcohol, all that kind of stuff to boost me back up and keep me going. I would say if you're feeling down, if you're feeling sluggish, if you're feeling mentally not well, you want to first look at your diet. And what tends to happen is that when you get in high stress, high pressure situations, your diet is one of the first things that goes. You start thinking, okay, well, I'm working late, so I'll just have some takeaway. I'll just have some pizza. I'm just at my desk. I need some comfort food, so I'll cane like a liter of Coca-Cola or something. These things are really, really important. I mean, they cook sugar for, I mean, I won't go deep into it because I don't want you to get kind of like blocked off your channel, but things like sugar are incredibly bad. I mean, it's cancer candy, essentially. So if anyone wants to look into sugar, look into processed foods and look into sugar. And when you look into it deep enough, you'll never have it again. And when I stopped doing that, we talk about inflammation. Inflammation went down a lot. I was full of toxicity. I look back at photos back then. I was just ballooned. Even before the anaphylactic shock, it was ballooned full of toxicity. I just thought I was overweight. It was toxins. So one of the things is that eat. Another thing I do now, which I never used to do then, was be actively moving. When I was at university, ironically, I didn't drink much alcohol in university because I was very much dedicated to kind of like getting into advertising. And so I was really, really hardcore on the work. So I would always be in the gym or at my home gym. I'd have some weights at the gym. So I'd always be moving. So when I was at university, I was probably my most mentally healthy, my most mentally strong. Even though we were working lots at university, it was a very hardcore course I was on. I didn't feel the stress. I didn't feel the pressure because I was doing the workouts. I was moving. So what we do now and what I still do now, I get in those 10,000 steps a day. We know that those 10,000 steps a day, they boost our self-esteem. They lower anxiety, depression, and anger and frustration and stuff by doing that movement. There's another thing I do, which is every 1,000 seconds. There's a thing called micradian rhythms. And this is every 1,000 seconds. I just get up. So if I'm at my computer a lot because I'm working with clients over Zoom or creating workshops or running workshops and trainings, I'll get up every 1,000 seconds, not when I'm in the middle of a session with a client, but when I'm working at my desk, I'll get up every 1,000 seconds and just do a couple of press ups or something, or just run around a house or just walk somewhere just to move because our bodies are designed to move. So that is something I'll do. And we don't do it enough. Another thing I didn't do, which I always get in now, is 7 to 8 hours of good quality sleep. I never used to do that. That was again one of the things I thought I could sacrifice that. So we would work till really late in the night. We'd get in really early in the morning, but don't forget we've also drunk loads of beer and stuff. So my sleep was shit. It was totally shit. Looking back on it, I think I only survived as long as I did because I was in my 20s, and you can kind of cruise through on a lot of bad stuff at that kind of age. I can't in any which way, shape, form, or now. So you want to get those 7 to 8 hours of sleep. What we also know about sleep, if you want 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep, you've actually got to be in your bed for about 8 to 9 hours because there's a certain chunk of that period where you're not going to be sleeping. You're going to be see whatever you're doing, but you want to get in there for about 8 to 9 hours. And that's what I do now. So I get that stuff. Another thing I do is that these things, iPhones, all of that kind of iPads and stuff, the blue light that comes off that. I mean, a lot of people will go to bed and they'll be surfing through Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff and the news channels on their kind of when they're in bed. This blue light, we know it destroys melatonin. So it can reduce melatonin in your body. It can reduce the melatonin by 50%, but it also stalls the melatonin from being released for 3 hours. So if you're blowing your conscious stuff with blue light, even though you're in bed for those 9 hours, well, knock off 3 hours at the very least, because you're not going to be sleeping. You haven't got the melatonin, which is why we have really crap sleep. There's another important thing about sleep, which again, I didn't know, is that you go through about approximately 4 cycles in sleep. The first 2 cycles are the deepest cycles, and you've got the second 2 cycles are a bit not as deep. In the first 2 cycles, and especially the first cycle, the first couple of hours, 90 minutes to a couple of hours, that's when we get a physical restoration where our cells regenerate and they build themselves. Then the second wave that we go on, we get a bit of that physical regeneration, but it's more about emotional regeneration. And the second 2 cycles are more about that emotional and kind of mental clarity clearing. We clear the kind of the plaque out of the brain. Now, if this is really important as well, is that this is what I make sure I do now and I didn't do then. I go to bed at a set time, because here's the thing: you get into a rhythm. Again, you've got to work with the rhythms. You get into a rhythm. Now, if you go to bed at, like, I don't know, say 11:30 every night, but then you start going to bed at 2, you don't start your sleep cycles at cycle 1. You start your sleep cycle at cycle 3 or cycle 2.5, which means you get the sleep, but you're not getting physical recovery. Your body isn't rebuilding itself from the shit it's been done in the day before. So what I was doing, talk about my immune system getting a battering from a physiological perspective, my sleep patterns are all, one, I wasn't getting enough sleep. 2, I was burning up my consciousness with blue light before I went to sleep. So I'd be looking at my laptop before I went to sleep. But I would also be going at erratic times. So I might have been getting some emotional clearance, which is probably how I felt emotionally okay. But physiologically, I wasn't recovering. I was getting no physiological recovery in my sleep. I make sure I don't do that now, because I know how important that is, especially again now we need an immune system to be really strong. We have to be really careful we do that. So you got eat, move, sleep, focus. Is this useful, by the way?
It's incredibly useful. It's absolutely brilliant. Before we go into focus, which I'm really excited to hear about, it's really interesting as well with all these things, because there's like a dominoes effect, isn't there? Because if you don't do the other things that you've mentioned before, obviously you can't sleep. You know, if you're full of cortisol and caffeine and stress, and it's weird, isn't it? Because all these behaviors that you talked about at the beginning, you know, around processed foods and all the other things, sugar, they're all highly addictive as well. And I think even adrenaline and cortisol, even though it might feel unpleasant, that can be sort of, I don't want to use necessarily the word addictive, but they can become compulsive, can't they? You know, and you can sort of enjoy being in a kind of highly stressed situation, and it just cascades like it did in your case. And you know, the sleep stuff is really, really important. I mean, I'm very guilty of being on my phone late at night. I have actually, I do this thing now on my phone called a grayscale, which is basically where they turn off the blue light. But I don't think it makes any difference. I mean, it might make a small difference, but obviously my brain's still active because I'm still darting between apps. But I'm really trying not to do that. And of course, phones are very addictive and compulsive, and I suppose that's another thing as well. I suppose the old adage, you know, that grandma used to say, you know, sleep on it. What you just said, it really highlights how true that is, because if you're getting the right kind of sleep, it's amazing, all those different phases that you just talked about. And there's a lot of study going on at the moment about REM sleep, which is, you know, they're discovering new things all the time, and it's the stuff that you just talked about. But yeah, please do tell us about focus next, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's really, what you brought up something really important there about if you knock out the blue light, but you're still going through the phone. Here's what's interesting about that is that the last thing you think about at night is the thing your brain focuses on, your unconscious mind focuses upon throughout the night. So if the last thing you put in your brain is death, destruction, and things that are going wrong, your brain then spends that entire night essentially hypnotically coding you with all of this stuff. And then you wake up feeling anxious, nervous, worried, concerned. It's because you've had that 7 hours. You've actually preloaded your consciousness, your unconsciousness, with a bunch of negative stuff. So it's really important you don't do that. So one of the best ways to get into sleep in a really quality way, which is going to make the most use of that sleep, because sleep is also where neuroplasticity happens. So this is when we kind of fuse those neural connections that is responsible for learning. So that when we have a day and we've been learning something new, we actually we remember it in the day, but we learn it, and it encodes into the brain at night when we sleep. So it's really important to have that. So one of the really good things to do at a practice that I do at the end of the day before I go to sleep is a thing called win, learn, optimize. And what you want to do is essentially to frame the previous day that you've just finished in a really positive way, so that your brain can sleep on it without that anxiety that's going to build up and ruminate on and wake you up in an anxious state. So win, learn, optimize is essentially, this is 3 questions I'll always ask myself. Win is, what did I do well today? Even if it was, I showed up and I got through it. That's a win. That's a victory. Yeah, that's a win. Then the learn is, okay, so from this, what did I learn today? So sometimes our brain, because we've got a 5-to-1 negative bias, we can over dramatize how bad the day was. So we kind of go, oh, the day was dreadful, because we're 5 times more likely to remember the negative, and we worry about failure. But every failure is just an opportunity to learn. So you go, okay, so what did I do well today, and what have I learned today? Now, if something didn't go right, what can I learn from that? What's the learning I'm going to take from that today? And optimize is knowing what the win I did, know what I did well. I know what I've learned. How can I optimize for tomorrow to make it even better? What can I do to push that forward into the next day to make that great? That then is what my brain, my unconscious mind then is ruminating on as I sleep. So I'm maximizing that sleep. I'm not just getting physiological recovery. I'm not getting the emotional recovery. I'm also programming my brain for success for the next day. So I'm waking up feeling good. I'm waking up feeling energized. I never woke up feeling like that, because I never did that. I was kind of, the last thing I would think about was worrying about the next day and the brief and how it was going to go disastrous. That would blow my sleep up, which is why we drank the alcohol. And many of us were guilty of it. We drink the alcohol to pass out.
Exactly. And you never get that restorative sleep. You're just literally passing out and then coming to the next day. You're not even really waking up.
Exactly. It was kind of like sleep was just got in the way a lot of the times. It was one of those things you had to do, but it got in the way, because if we didn't sleep, we'd get more work done. I think that's mental, but that's how it was. So sleep, really, really important. So win, learn, optimize before you go to sleep. Program your brain with that. Get that unconscious mind working on that stuff. Get your physiological recovery. Get your emotional recovery. Come up the next day feeling good. So that's a big one, basically.
I think, I do quite a bit of work in rehabs, and a lot of the things that we talk about, or when I'm working one-on-one with people, is particularly with stuff around addiction, is about having a nightly inventory, and sometimes meditation is part of that as well. But what I really like about yours is it's almost like a supercharged, very focused nightly inventory that's incredibly positive. So that's incredibly useful. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. You said earlier on, we touched on it briefly, that you don't demonize stress. I just wondered, I know this is a bit of a finagly question, if that's the right word. Do you sort of use stress to your advantage now? Do you sort of, I mean, your CV is very impressive, and I know, it's amazing all the different strands of work that you've all brought together. I'd imagine that you have to do a lot of multitasking and put on lots of different hats. How do you use stress positively sort of now?
Yeah, I don't use stress positively, but I use pressure positively. So I again, it's working with your biology and working with the rhythms. So it's actually perfect timing, because this comes onto focus. The focus point is about that. Is, so how can you properly manage pressure? So this is how you do it. You've got circadian rhythms, which everyone kind of familiar, most people are familiar with. And a circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle. That's another biological cycle. So the sleep-wake cycle is a circadian rhythm, 24 hours, yeah? But you've got smaller rhythms within the circadian rhythms called ultradian rhythms. And ultradian rhythms, I bloody wish someone had told me about this when I was way, way younger, because it would have probably saved me a bloody anaphylactic shock and stuff. So an ultradian rhythm, they happen every 90 to 120 minutes. And if you imagine an ultradian rhythm, so if I look on the camera up there, it's kind of like, it kind of goes up and down like this. So it oscillates on and off throughout the day. So what they're designed to do, you go up at high performance peak for 90 minutes. At around 90 minutes to 120 minutes, you start losing your focus and you start being distracted. Willpower goes down naturally. Your energy starts waning and you're going to hit a dip. And then you go back, naturally supposed to go back up to another high performance spike. That's 90 minutes to 120 minutes. Then you dip again. Now, what happens is that you'll notice it yourself. If you start becoming aware of it, you'll notice that after about an hour and a half to 2 hours, if you're doing a lot of deep work, you start getting distracted. As I say, your willpower goes, you kind of want to reach for a packet of peanuts and all that kind of stuff, or a pizza or whatever. That's what kind of naturally happens. Now, what I do now is that what you're supposed to have is a thing called an ultradium healing response. And it's critically important if you don't want to fight your biology, you want to work with your biology. So you work for 90 minutes to 120 minutes. It's different for each person, but it's around that kind of area. You want to do deep work for that period. And then you want to have about 15 minutes to 20 minutes of deep love. So deep work, deep love. And deep love is essentially break away from the challenge, break away from the problem. Go for a walk, detach from the problem, kind of like dislocate yourself from the situation you're in, then go on to the next high performance spike. So essentially the pressure goes up naturally. You're riding that pressure. When you start feeling it dip, you're honoring the fact that your biology is shifting down gear. You hear that, you have your ultradium healing response, which enables you to push yourself up to the next spike, which is essentially how you kind of surf the flow wave throughout the day. Now, what tends to happen and what I did really wrong was that I used to think that the best way to work was like full blast all day long and collapse at the weekend. That's how I thought high performance was. That's a high performer. So when my kind of I did hit the like 2 hour mark, the 90 minutes to 2 hour mark, my focus would wane, my willpower would go. So I would go and get a Red Bull or a Relentless energy drink or something to spike myself back up. Some people might go and get a cigarette or something to kind of ride over that wave. And then I would keep on riding. So they would be bouncing across the top of the peaks of these waves, not realizing they're destroying their immune system. They're destroying their biology. It doesn't work that way. It does not like to work that way. It overstresses it out. The also thing you said earlier about can stress and cortisol be addictive? 100% to get addicted to that stuff. I was 100% addicted to that stuff. I mean, it was kind of like my number one addiction. If we say what my number one addiction was, it would have been cortisol, 100%. And because what tends to happen is we stay locked into the things that are familiar to us, even if they're destructive to us. We stay in them, which is why we can stay in destructive relationships. Our brain hates uncertainty even more than certain doom. So it would rather just stay in certain doom, which is where I was, and a lot of people are, rather than face uncertainty, which is let's break out of this pattern, let's do something healthier. It would rather stick with doom than be uncertain. So it can be addictive, very much so. And that's how I manage the pressure now. I ride the waves. Essentially, I call it like sprint like bolt, essentially. I'm sprinting, high performance sprints. And that's how I break up the day.
Wow, that's incredible, Matt. Thank you for that. It's hugely helpful. You might be somebody, well, I think you're the perfect person to ask this question to. I started at the beginning with the stats that those working in the creative industries are 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem. And then interestingly, in performing arts and entertainment, which I don't expect you to know as much about, this anxiety is 15 times more likely and depression twice as likely. Why do you think the creative brain is more prone to poor mental health?
From my own experience and working with clients, is that I think we hold ourselves up to a higher standard and probably an unreasonable standard than most of the population. We also put our heart and soul on the line a lot of the times when we're doing the work, whether we're acting or whether we're writing or whether we're putting out paintings and artwork out there. That's our soul that we put in front of the world. And a lot of the times it doesn't go down well. And so we have to, that batters your self-esteem, your sense of value, your sense of worth is kind of based upon people liking your work. And I kind of jokingly say that the creative industries attracts insecure overachievers. So it attracts that kind of character anyway. And I think that and I can't say this is not based in science, but from my own personal experience, I know that I got into art originally as a kid because I got praised for it. I did something good at school, some art. Someone went, "You're really good at art. You're a great artist." I was like, "Oh, wow, that makes me feel good. That boosts my self-esteem." So I start doing more and more of that, and that becomes my identity. Now, what everything you identify with has the power to control you. If you identify with that, then it starts controlling you. But if that doesn't go down well, that can lead to a depression. That can lead to your sense of value and your sense of worth being seriously eroded in not a very good way, essentially.
Definitely when I was at drama school, albeit 20 years ago now, and again, I think it is changing. It was very much like, you are an actor. That is who you are. It is the most important thing in your life. And if you don't make it the most important thing in your life, and, then you're a failure. And you've got to almost see it as your entire identity. Otherwise, you're going to fail. And one very simple thing that I made a shift on about a decade ago is that I just don't view myself that way. I mean, my Instagram might say different. I've got actor at the top and on my CV and things like that. But I just see it as something that I do. Is it simple things like that? How do you start to disattach, if you like, to keep that boundary healthy? Like how do you stay ambitious and on top of your game, but not let it become your identity?
Yeah, a great question. So basically, back in the olden days, we used to think psychology used to believe in a thing called the single self theory. And the single self theory said this, that the most robust, most resilient, most well-adjusted, emotionally stable people in the world are people who are just one personality at all times in all domains. It's not true. And what we now know from modern psychology, and unfortunately too many people don't yet know it, but they really should know it, is it's actually multiple self theory is the way we want to be going. Multiple self theory is that we're more well adjusted, we're more emotionally stable when we are multiple cells or sub-cells. We have sub-cells of ourselves, we have different personas, different parts of us. So we have the part of us that's the family person, the part of us that's like the son, the daughter, the part of us that's the wife, the husband, the part of us that's the creative director or the actor. Now, if you want to kind of help protect your psychology, there's a thing called psychological distancing. And I do know that some celebrity training does this with people. It's a thing called the alter ego. Now, things like Kobe had the alter ego, the Black Mamba. Beyonce had the Sasha Fierce was her alter ego. Lots of them had it. Muhammad Ali had the alter ego. He was originally the Louisville Lip, and then obviously Muhammad Ali and all of those kind of things. But what these things do, they enable you to psychologically distance yourself from you in that domain. So who I am as a coach is a very different person to who I am when I'm doing my videos on LinkedIn. So my videos on LinkedIn with me as the marketer, not as the coach, or kind of marketer / self-help person, that's a different person to who I am as the coach. It's a different person to who I am as the kind of husband. And they have to be, because by doing that, by creating an alter ego, it's by purposely creating an alter ego. Like Beyonce, for example, she created Sasha Fierce because she was from a small town, America, religious town. And she, as Beyonce, could never get on stage and do that kind of music and that kind of moves and kind of... and live with that within her own psychology. So she created Sasha Fierce to psychologically distance herself from that. Therefore, if anyone attacked Sasha Fierce, it didn't hurt Beyonce. So with the alter egos, what you want to do is you want to think about in that domain that you want to excel in, you want to think, who do I know who is excellent within that domain? And what traits do they have that I could use that's going to enable me to be excellent in that domain? So when I wanted to do the videos, those videos on LinkedIn, I kind of picked a couple of people I massively admired, kind of hero worshipped within the world of online marketing and stuff. And it was Frank Kern and Brendan Burchard. And I would write down a whole list of their traits and personality traits and their virtues and values. Which ones do they use that would be most useful for me? That ability just to kind of point and shoot, to not give a shit about what people think. Then you give that alter ego a name. So my alter ego who does those videos is a guy called Geronimo, which is Geronimo is what they say when the paratroopers jump out of the aeroplanes. It's literally when I go to shoot a video, it's like, Geronimo, I'm jumping out. I don't give a shit what the public think. I don't care if you like it, if you hate it. It's not me anyway. So it never touches me. So that's a really, really good thing to do, is create an alter ego. Now, here's why this works from a psychological perspective. So Freud, actually Carl Jung and Freud, they talked about the shadow. What's really interesting is that the things that we don't like about ourselves, the things that don't fit our society when we're growing up, that are kind of like aren't great, we push into the shadows. Things that we think aren't socially acceptable, anger, rage, all that kind of stuff, we push into our shadows. But also, because we don't want to be ejected and rejected from the group that we're in, we push all of our superpowers into the shadows when we're kids as well. So we're born extraordinary, but we become ordinary. We essentially dumb ourselves down to the lowest, to the mid range, to the medium common denominator of the people we're around, the kind of caregivers we're around. If we stand up with that tall poppy, as they say in Australia, we get our head lopped off. So all of our kind of like gifts, our superpowers, we push them into the shadow. Now, Jung would call this the gold. And here's where it gets really exciting. This is where hero worshipping comes from. The people you hero worship them because they have the traits you have pushed into the shadows. You wouldn't get triggered in a positive way by those heroes if you didn't have that stuff deep within your psychology. So just as we get triggered in a negative way by people who have negative traits that are in our shadow, we get triggered by our heroes because they have the positive traits. So when you're creating an alter ego, think of who your heroes are within that domain who does it really well, but also know if you connect with them at some psychological level, is because you have those traits innately already. That enables you to connect to it. Now, what happens with the alter ego? You create the alter ego, like Beyonce created Sasha Fierce. There's an interview with her with Oprah Winfrey, and she talks about Sasha. It's a very short interview. It's fascinating. But she says over time, Sasha Fierce wasn't necessary. She just became Beyonce. And that's what happens. It really helps to kind of, but always remember, anything you identify with has the power to control you. Everything you disidentify with, you regain the power over.
Wow, that's hugely interesting and so helpful. Like, thank you so much for that. I wonder if I can ask you a little bit of a slightly naive question here, because someone I've always hero worshipped is the singer Prince. Now, obviously, I can't play. Well, I say obviously you wouldn't know, but I can't play the guitar. In fact, I can't play any musical instruments. I can't sing and I can't dance. How would I? So, what would it be about, say, Prince that resonates with me? Would you think? If I haven't got his obvious talents.
Yeah, well, you're talking technical skills there. So you're talking learned abilities. So Prince didn't wake up being able to play the guitar and be able to dance. He kind of, again, to be fair, like, because I played the guitar, the reason I play guitar and got dedicated to playing a guitar isn't because I'm many more talented than anybody else. Everybody else has the ability to create any talent they want. I got praised for at a young age, and therefore my identity became, if I can attach some of that to my identity, I become better at it. So that's a learned skill. So when you're looking at people you hero worship, it's more what are their innate traits, what are their personality traits, what are their virtues. Like Slash is another one of my kind of heroes, Slash Guns N' Roses. Again, Slash, another alter ego, Soul Hudson. Do you know what I mean? Another alter ego. I don't know the real Soul Hudson. Do you know what I mean? It's very few people do. I know Slash and I know those kind of traits. So those kind of traits about that kind of creative exuberance, that kind of, he's laid back. He doesn't give a fuck. That's kind of where I got to when I started doing the coaching stuff, was that I didn't want to be a normal coach who's kind of like, back when I started it like 12, 13 years ago, coaches were kind of suited and booted and quite stuck up. And this wasn't me. I wanted to be more like Slash. I wanted to be more like Malcolm McLaren. I wanted to be more like Muhammad Ali and all those kind of things. But it's those kind of traits, that relaxed attitude, that anarchy from Malcolm McLaren, that kind of want to creative destruction that was a lot of Malcolm McLaren's kind of thing. Those are traits that I admire within them that I have. Now, I can't play the guitar like Slash. I wish I bloody well could. But I've got certain elements of his personality. I'd like to think if I met Slash, now here's a real weird thing. If I met Slash, I probably wouldn't get on with him and he wouldn't get on with me anyway, but we probably wouldn't, because I don't know the real Soul Hudson. All I know is the Slash, the persona. So it's to think about that. It's what traits do they have? What personas do they have? What is it about Prince that's deeper than the learned abilities that you admire within that person?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you know, Prince was very much like that. He was an enigma, wasn't he? Really, and he really shied away from interviews. And I think when the whole social media explosion kicked off, I mean, I remember at drama school, like them talking about having a website. You know, that's how long ago I left now, and I always felt very sort of uncomfortable. I remember when Friends Reunited came out. You know, I was quite excited by that and MySpace, but this whole social media explosion actually doesn't sit hugely comfortably with me, even though I'm on it and I enjoy being on it. But there was something I admired about him. It's just that he didn't need to sort of be in the limelight to kind of show what he could do, and that kind of enigma is so outdated now, isn't it, from the older celebrity culture, where it was actually the opposite. It was all about not being an enigma and actually not saying too much. That was kind of the allure, which is really interesting because we've kind of gone completely the other way now.
Yeah, well, I think for people's mental health, if people realize that your skills and abilities and the darker side as well have been pushed into the shadows, that if you start looking at your heroes and the people you most admire, but there's a part of them within you, that's something to explore and to connect with and to kind of like reclaim a goal. See, I believe that therapy, for example, it's the job of the therapist to hold that other people's goal until they're ready to take control of it themselves. And that's when you know the therapeutic is relationship is over, when you can go, okay, you're strong enough to carry your own gold. And I think what the great therapists do, they see the gold within the person. And it's like, reminds me of a story of Michelangelo. They asked Michelangelo, how he managed to carve David out of that block of marble. Because what a lot of people don't know about the marble that David was carved out of was that marble was actually rejected by 3 other sculptors before Michelangelo. It wasn't perfect marble, it was an imperfect block of marble. So it was rejected by other ones. He picked it up. Now, also, he's carved a lot of that in really kind of adverse weather conditions as well. And people said, how did you manage to carve that magnificent statue out of that block of marble? And Michelangelo said it was very simple. All I did was chip away at all of the parts that weren't David. And I think that's what therapists do, is they can see the angel within the marble. And what they do is they chip away at all of the parts of that marble that aren't that angel. And then when they expose that angel, they give that gold back to that person. That's when it's finished. It's like, there you go. That's what I saw all along. And I think that's what would help society in general. If people saw the angel in the marble more, I think things would be a lot better off, basically.
Yeah, 100%. There's two things that have really sprung from that, if that's okay. One is, I know this wasn't your intention, but how subjective art can be, or any kind of creativity. And I think that's part of the stress of creatives, isn't it? Because they put their heart and soul into it, but everyone's got a different opinion about anything creative. I mean, look at the Mona Lisa. Some people will say it's the greatest painting ever, and some people absolutely hate it. Do you think that plays a part as well in the sort of creative mind overthinking things, and maybe being more prone to stress and maybe addictions and mental health?
100%. Yeah, totally. Again, it's the over identification with that thing. When someone attacks your work, they're attacking you at the soul level. And that's what it feels like. It feels like they're attacking you. It's cut straight deep. So again, that's why things like the alter ego help. Another thing, which is a good thing to do, which is to boost your self-esteem. So you've got self-confidence is what you believe you're capable of having. Your self-esteem is what you believe you're worthy of having. So a lot of people aren't suffering with low confidence because they believe they're capable of having a lot more than they have. In creativity as well, I believe I'm capable of getting that movie. I believe I'm capable of winning that award. I believe I'm capable of getting that dance gig, etc. But it's the self-esteem that what I believe I'm worthy of, though. So if there's a clash between your self-confidence and your self-esteem, that's when self-sabotage happens. So we start collapsing our own castle. So if we want to increase our self-esteem, which means that if our own self-esteem, our own sense of worth is high anyway, when someone judges the work in a negative way, it doesn't destroy our self-esteem. So how can we build our self-esteem? Well, basically, look at it like this. Your self-esteem is your reputation with yourself. So basically, there's a thing called Dwizzywid, do what you say you will do. And that's how you build trust. If you want to build trust with people, always think of Dwizzywid, do what you say you will do. That's how you build trust with people. If you start not doing what you say you will do, you'll erode trust. But that's exactly the same with yourself. Your reputation will go down if you don't say you will do, if you don't do what you say you will do to yourself. So how you build it is this. You get clear of who you are at your fully optimized best. Go and look at some of the heroes and go and see, who am I when I'm at my fully optimized best in work, love, play, or whatever, or energy or health. Who am I? Really think about that. Who am I when I'm at my best? Who have I been when I've been at my best as a parent? Who have I been when I'm at my best at work? Who have I been when I'm at my best as an actor? Then all you want to do is then go, so what do I need to do to close the gap between what I'm capable of being and what I'm actually being? Because there will be a disconnect. A lot of people, we don't raise ourselves to the level of what we're capable of. We lower ourselves to what we can kind of put up with. So what we want to do with self-esteem, every time we do something that is in alignment with what we know we're capable of, our best self, so we have to be clear of what our best self is. Every time we do something in alignment with that, we get a +1 on our self-esteem. And every time we do something that is not in alignment with that, we get a -1 on the self-esteem scoreboard. But the beautiful thing about this is, you know the game you're playing, and now you can play it well. Because if you go, okay, the game is this, who am I at my fully optimized best in work? Who am I at my fully optimized best in love? Who am I at my fully optimized best in health? Then all you need to do is go, what do I need to do every day to prove I am who I say I am? Every time you prove you are who you say you are, your self-esteem goes up. And that's one of the big things I would say probably one of the biggest shifts I made after the fundamentals was working on self-esteem, was disidentifying with the work. So create an alter ego that's, I've got the my coaching alter ego is a subconscious bullshit eliminator. That's not me in my relationship, obviously, because that would go down incredibly badly. My alter ego in marketing is Geronimo. But then what I've also got is that phase of it as well. I've got that self-esteem scoreboard. So I'm going to do things that are in alignment with who I am at my best when I'm doing that stuff. Therefore, don't get knocked by other people's version of who you are. You prove to yourself you are who you say you are, not them telling you who you say you are.
So it sounds like you've got all of these hats and these other characters that you become, but also at the heart of it, you're very much aware of the authentic Matt. There's sort of a nice balance, it sounds.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Authenticity is a difficult one, and because it's kind of the authentic self from a lot of psychologists, and including CBT, which is kind of like a modern psychology and very science-based and stuff. They all talk about and believe in the thing called the seed of consciousness. Now, the seed of consciousness is our true self. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Whoever we think we are, we're much more than that. All we are is a suit we've decided to wear. And we wear different suits in different parts of our life. So our authentic self is the seed of consciousness. But if we want to change our identity, we're wearing a different suit. So when we start saying, oh, who are you at your fully optimized best in this domain in work? Who are you at fully optimized best in this domain in love? That multiple self theory, we're not chipping away at the seed of consciousness. That still exists, but we're aware that we're putting on a different suit.
Wow. So is that where imposter syndrome comes from? In the sense that we never actually realize that we're much more, and so therefore we have this huge self-doubt. I've noticed in the creative industries that a lot of people suffer with it, and I think the stats actually show that, you know, if you're more intelligent, if you're more successful, that actually you're more likely to have imposter syndrome, which I think is really, really interesting. You know, the amount of actors who are, you know, getting an Oscar, and there's a little voice in their head that says you don't deserve this Oscar, or, you know, CEOs of very successful companies thinking, you know, I'm going to be found out that I'm not very good. Just find that really, really interesting that you know, it's so prevalent in the creative industries as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. One is that maybe you are an imposter. So maybe you're showing up as the wrong person in the wrong domain, i.e. alter egos. Go back to that thing, isn't it? It's like maybe I'm showing up as the coach when I should be showing up as the husband. Like I used to get told off when I was a creative director in advertising. I used to get told off by my wife saying, "Stop fucking creatively directing me," because I would wear that suit within that relationship, and it didn't go down too well. So I was an imposter. I was the fraud within that relationship. I shouldn't be in that persona right there and then. But even more simple than that, imposter syndrome is very, very basic, and it's this: it is an inability to internalize your own success. That is imposter syndrome. So this is why highly successful people have it. It's an inability to internalize their own success. This is why I say the win, learn, optimize exercise. By doing the win, what did I do well today? What have I learned today? How can I optimize today? One, that's going to build my self-esteem, because it's closing the gap between what I'm capable of being and what I'm actually being. But it's also doing that part as well. It's also kind of like internalizing my own success, my wins. We don't do it. We're told that if you start celebrating your own, which comes to the last one actually on the fundamentals, celebration is really important, and we're not told, and we're indoctrinated out of celebrating our own greatness and our own stuff, because we're saying don't show off, don't be a big head, all of this kind of stuff, not realizing, because no one's taught this stuff, actually that's destroying everyone's self-esteem. We're supposed to celebrate. We're supposed to go, yeah, that's fucking great. What I just did there was great. In sports psychology, they've got a thing where if something doesn't go well, they get the athletes to say needs work. Not that shit, needs work. When something goes well, they're conditioned to say that's like me. See, when Kobe's on the court and he's the Black Mamba, you can guarantee when he's doing what he's doing, he's going, that's like me. He's not an imposter. And that's what we don't do. So you need to internalize your own success, celebrate your own victories. It's really, really important. And actually saying, the science is actually saying that celebration is likely to become as important as gratitude is.
Wow. I mean, that's huge. I mean, I think I think at some point it was almost seen as anti-British, wasn't it, to to celebrate? Oh, we can't do that. One must be humble and about everything all the time. I completely agree, and a lot of me and my friends recently have we've talked about it, that when we're on the phone to each other, we sort of remind each other of the things that we're really doing well at the moment, because we're all really bad at forgetting, and we literally do it. We're like, oh, I just want to remind you, mate, you've done this and you've done that, and you're awesome and you've done that, and we're sort of consciously trying to do it. Matt, I'm really aware that I've had you on this podcast a little while now, and I know you're a busy man. I wondered if I could just get one more question in, if there's time. One thing that I found really inspiring was that you used a moment ago comparison in a really, really healthy way. Looking at people that you hero worship and making connections there. I know a lot of creatives, certainly that I know, sort of compare and despair, and we all know that comparison is the thief of joy, particularly in a very hyper social media world. I just wondered if you've got any advice for people. Who sort of go online, or maybe they don't go online, but they sort of struggle with comparison and sort of self-esteem. Have you got any sort of practical tips on how to sort of navigate through that?
Living in Mallorca, I'll cut here first. Living in Mallorca, so I see a lot of people doing selfies and stuff on Instagram and whatever, and they kind of look great and all of that kind of stuff. And I can see what they're standing behind. So they've got a palm tree behind them, but they're standing on a motorway, or they've got a chink of sunlight when it's been shitting down with rain. Now, everybody else is looking at that social media post and going, oh, wow, look at their lifestyle. But actually, that's just bullshit, because I'm sitting there and I'm saying, yeah, but you're standing next to a motorway, or I just saw you had a massive row with your friend. Now you've stopped to take a photo and you're like, hey, I look great and stuff. So one is realize that actually, don't believe everything you see, because if you could get a wider screen of stuff, you probably realize it ain't all it's cracked up to be. But bigger than that is you've got a big enough game to play by closing the gap between who you're capable of being yourself and who you're actually being. If you want to compare yourself to anyone, compare yourself to who you actually are at your absolute optimized, fully brilliant best. Get really clear on that. Become that person. That's probably the best thing, because comparison artists to everybody else, it's one from doing what I've done for so many years now, and so many people who are on front pages of magazines all over the place and stuff. People will look and go, oh my God, I wish I was that person and stuff. I see the other side of them. I see the pain they're going through. I see the insecurities they're going through. I see the imposter syndrome they're going through. I see the comparisonitis they have to other people. Don't be really careful what you wish for, but I would say the game you're playing is to close the gap of your own true self. Whoever you think you are, whatever you think you're capable, you're so much more than that. You're capable of so much more than that. Start doing things that are in alignment with that. Start doing things that are so small you can't fail. So don't go, okay, my fully optimized best, I would be doing X, Y, and Z. Don't start. There's a thing called your comfort zone, your stretch zone, and your snap zone. Don't go from comfort zone into a snap zone. Go, okay, I need to do bang all this, because you'll just snap straight back into comfort zone. Stretch yourself a little bit. Kind of think, okay, so my fully optimized best, where I am my absolute best, I would do this activity, or I would think this way, I would say this thing. Great. We'll do it so small you can't fail. And remember, it's consistency over intensity. That's how you build that muscle. That's the gap you should be playing. That's the gap you should be closing. That's the game you should be playing. If you want to compare yourself to anyone, compare yourself to who you are, your absolute best. Look at your heroes. Go, what do they have that's inside of me, that sits inside of me? Maybe it's time for me to start reclaiming some of that stuff. And realizing social media, I mean, it's kind of like, no one puts up a bad day, or very few people, apart from Peter Andre, puts up his bad days all the time. But apart from Peter Andre, no one puts up their bad days.
100%. I always think of social media a little bit like, I was quite lucky to do a very short stint on EastEnders, very short stint. And I remember going into the Queen Vic. I had a scene in the Queen Vic in Albert Square. And I don't know if it's changed, but back then, it had the front of the Queen Vic, and then you went in and it was completely destitute. There was nothing in there, and they shot the inside in a studio somewhere else. And I sort of always have that image of what social media is like, Matt, thank you so much, mate, for coming on School of Rock Bottom and sharing so much with us. It's been absolutely brilliant. Usually I ask my guests something like this at the end, if you could speak to someone who was in your shoes in your 20s that was going through the amount of stress that you were, how would you stop that person getting to a place where they would be in that hospital? And I don't want to answer the question for you, but I would highly recommend, and you might disagree and want to say more, but to reach out to people like Matt, and I'm going to put all your amazing links and all the incredible work you do in the show notes so that people can do that. But would that be something that you would say to your 20-year-old self who was in that highly addictive state of stress, working hard, caffeine, booze, just go, go, go all the time? Would your main sort of advise someone in that right now just to reach out to a professional maybe, or would you say something else?
Yeah, I would certainly, to break the seal to start with, because it's kind of it's difficult to do it on your own. It's kind of, I would reach out to somebody. I wish I had someone I could have turned to. I always say, like, if you've got a good mate and good friends, what tends to happen when you get yourself in those kind of situations, it's just like with depression as well, is that, like, when you start cutting yourself off from the things you love doing and the people you love being around, you start isolating yourself. But that just makes stuff a lot worse, because you're not getting all that oxytocin and stuff being around people. So I would say that number one is that I would have been more open and honest with my friends. I'd have said, look, I'm fucking struggling. Because if I had done that, like we do now, and like, well, I mean, for many years now I have done, but if we had the conversations, my friends back then, that we were too macho and too full of bravado to have, one, it'd have been so much different. We'd have realized. But I always wish I'd gone to see someone, to be fair, just to kind of crack this nut open a bit. And I just stopped beating myself up. I think the thing is, it's kind of, in some ways, I wish, and I don't know how you do it, but I wish you could transport yourself to like 40 years in the future and realize it ain't fucking worth it, basically. So go and speak to someone who's got that insight, they've got that projected future, and they can show you, they can teach you and show you what can come and how you can work with it. But all the stuff I did, all the stuff I've spoken about, I would have started doing that. If I had started getting better sleep, if I'd started eating better, if I'd kept going to the gym, if I'd actually celebrated my wins more, if I'd worked with my biology rather than fought it, if I'd actually give myself breaks and stop beating myself up that I need to work 24/7, I'd have been in a way better position. I just didn't do all of that kind of stuff.
You've given us an absolute Bible of tools today, Matt, and I can't thank you enough. We are out of time. And as I said, in the show notes, it's going to be packed full of ways to stay connected with Matt. I really hope you do that. And Matt, I hope you have a nice sunny day in Mallorca. I hope to see lots of
Thank
pictures
you,
of
Nate.
palm trees on social media this afternoon.
As I stand by the motorway.
By the motorway. So thanks again, Matt. And I just want to say to the listeners and viewers, thanks again for tuning in and supporting the podcast. Please remember to like this while you're watching it. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're not on YouTube at the moment. Maybe I know most of my followers are on Spotify or Apple. Leave a review. Apparently that really helps the algorithm. Share it with people that you think would benefit from this podcast. And thanks again to you, Matt. And for those at home, you're so welcome. And for those at home watching, listening, thank you too. And as always, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Thank you.